Thank you, EJ. Thank you very much. What's so wonderful about scientists, they're accurate and precise and compliant. Let's see if Tom can be the same.
Um, so, thank you. I may not be as eloquent as EJ, so I've put some slides together as a crux. So I'll just start by saying that biodiversity loss and climate change are linked, notwithstanding the important point that EJ makes that there's not one fix that will solve them both, and some things that fix climate change don't always address biodiversity. But generally, they interact in their effects. The way we respond to them, there are many synergies, for example, nature-based solutions that protect nature and mitigate climate change and help us adapt to climate change, for example, reducing flooding. So putting wetlands in the environment that would reduce flood risk. And the drivers of the two are actually linked as well. So you can see on the slide here that they both result from the way we live, the way we run our societies. Our institutions, our economic institutions, our financial institutions, our regulatory processes, our education systems, etc. So really getting to the root cause of these problems, we can potentially address both of them. So that's where a systems approach is important. And this is quite a technical slide, but the key points I want to make is that people look at a problem from different lenses, and it depends what disciplines you're from. My background is in ecology, and I might look at an environmental system and look at the biophysical aspects, but someone might be an economist and they might be thinking about the economic or aspects of that, technological aspects. And understanding how people see a problem from different lenses is the kind of crux of a sort of systems thinking approach. So this diagram is trying to point out that there are different ways of seeing a system. You can see there are multiple outcomes here in the colours. These are the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So we're not just trying to achieve one thing, reducing carbon emissions or restoring species. We're also trying to reduce poverty. We're trying to maintain, the quality of our oceans, etc. So we have a whole range of things we're trying to achieve at the same time. And one of the things in this diagram that I'd probably repeat quite a lot is it's about people. It's a people problem. So it's not, academic expertise is important, but it's about how people perceive the problem and engaging those different stakeholders. So on the top right there, understanding what their purposes are, what their values are, and thinking, long time scales. We're not just thinking, about the next year. We're thinking about future generations to come. And we're not just thinking about the UK, building resilience for the UK. We're talking about international issues, because a lot of the problems we face are international. We can't just look after our own garden and be protected from that. So really, my point I want to make is that things that go on in the world are events, whether it's a food price shock, for example, they arise from underlying structures ultimately that might come. People talk about our economic system driving these, or the way our food system is structured, but our institutions are made up of people's worldviews, both past and present. So if we want to change those institutions, it's about that cultural change as well. There's also an arrow perhaps back here from where events can affect our cultures as well, which adds an extra nuance here. But the main point really is that if you look at the diagram on the right, I think the circle, that people have these different lenses and you need to focus on them all. And I think at the moment, for example, that figure from before was from my time on secondment with DEFRA for 2.5 years on helping them to design a systems program. And what I did notice, there's very much a focus, a techno-scientific focus, focusing on economic fixes, regulatory fixes, assuming that if we just get the prices right, we can kind of live as we are and everything will be okay. But that is naive, because we need deeper change. We face a massive crisis, and I'm sure the discussion will go into this, the scale of change that is needed in how we live, how we work, how we travel. And it can be positive. It's about a negative change, but we need a deep cultural shift. So the positive news, I guess, is that a huge number of science policy organisations are starting to recognise this. So, for example, you can see here the Intergovernmental Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, bit of a mouthful, but this is like the IPCC for biodiversity, talks about the path to sustainability being a shift from broad values of individualism to sustainability-aligned values of collectivism, care, and equality. So this is really talking about moving away from our very kind of profit-driven, individualistic culture towards much more collectivist approach where we care for each other in the natural world. Yeah, so I mean, you can read these quotes for yourself, but what's important is that these organisations are actually now really talking about these cultural changes that are needed. Whether that follows through to change in the world is another question. But I think we're seeing an intellectual inflection point where these matters are recognised. And my last slide, I just want to add a tone of caution, I guess, because it's very challenging to transform systems, and we need massive change in all our institutions. And there are lock-ins that prevent those changes. But actually, there's also issues that they can be getting worse. These systems are dynamic. So just as an example about our connection to nature, there's a vicious cycle potentially at risk where we reduce nature, people are less able to go and see nature in their local environment, children are less exposed to it, they grow up kind of divorced from nature, they care about it less, and so they're less likely to campaign and aim to protect it. And that leads to this kind of vicious cycle, which arguably we're in many of our modern societies. But I'll end on a positive note, because of course you can turn that round to a virtuous cycle where we restore nature, people feel happier. This is huge amounts of research showing that people feel happier, less depressed, less anxious, but also more likely to carry out pro-environmental behaviours. So recycling, reducing their carbon footprint, volunteering for environmental organisations when they feel connected to nature. And of course, then that means that leads into a vicious cycle. So that's about nature connection, but there are others around for example, our sense of citizenship, whether we see ourselves as a small nation fighting against others, very xenophobic, pull up the barriers when there's problems, which you may have seen happening. For example, Trump's build a wall rhetoric, or these kind of survival instincts, I suppose, where countries say, well, things are rough, let's pull together, and we're going to face those troubles. So really, arguably, in the face of environmental crisis, we need more solutions that are international solutions, because these are transboundary problems: climate change, biodiversity loss, air pollution, ocean acidification, human migration. They're all about international cooperation. So again, you see the vicious cycle, pulling up the hatches when things get rough, versus the virtuous cycle, which is more cooperation operating. So if you're interested, there's a paper at the bottom which goes into these different types of cycles, but really it's trying to understand what they are so we can not be surprised when these things happen and catch us on the back foot. So I'll end there because I've probably slightly gone over.
Oh, it's okay. You're amongst friends. It's fine. There's no penalty for overrunning. Thank you very much. Just as you began, I've noted down vicious,